Lupin III is a long-running Japanese media franchise whose humble beginnings as a surprise hit manga series for adults soon bloomed into a national phenomenon while slowly building an international audience. It's gained most of its current recognition for its various anime series and movies, with the most recent shows especially finding a larger global presence thanks to streaming services. But what exactly is Lupin III and how did it come to be? To answer that second question, we need to examine the life and career of Kazuhiko Kato, a manga artist born in 1937 in Hokkaido, Japan. The son of a family of fishermen, he took an interest in drawing from an early age, beginning his manga career in junior high school where he would draw manga for children's magazines and his school newspaper. Kato's influences range from both the legendary manga creator Osamu Tezuka to more global artists working at the time. He has cited Popeye creator E.C. Sager, pinup girl painter Alberto Vargas, Blondie creator Chick Young, and especially Mad Magazine artists Mort Drucker and Sergio Aragonés as influences on his work, a very Western catalog of people to draw from indeed. Eventually, Kato left Hokkaido to escape the family fishing business and moved to Tokyo to pursue other interests. Around this time, he was studying electronics, hoping to work at a TV station, while also maintaining his drawing, creating a number of doujinshi, or self-published fan magazines with other manga artists. Soon, the Japanese publisher Futabasha noticed Kato's work and hired him on as a staff artist where he began drawing simple 4-panel gag comics known as Yonkama. After making his debut in 1965 with Playboy School, Kato was approached by Futabasha to create a limited series for their upcoming weekly magazine Manga Action, and he came up with the idea of his famous Master Thief. From these stories, Kato drew from many different sources, including classic literature like Treasure Island, The Three Musketeers, and The Count of Monte Cristo, mysteries like the works of Agatha Christie, Mission Impossible, and Columbo, and the humor of Mad Magazine. But for this new series, Kato would take chief inspiration from one source in particular, Arsène Lupin. Created in 1905 by French author Maurice Leblanc, Arsène Lupin is a gentleman thief known for his brilliant mind, frequent use of disguises, and suave black-adorned outfit. The character's adventures were serialized in novels and short stories and became a mainstay in both French literature and pop culture as a whole. You'll still find plenty of references to Arsène Lupin today, including the Arsène persona in Persona 5 and the 2021 Netflix show Lupin. But for Kato, the influence of Arsène Lupin on his new work extended far beyond simple references and allusions, as he would directly connect his story to the popular thief. He designed his main character as the grandson of Arsène Lupin, appropriately naming him Arsène Lupin III, or Lupin III for short. It certainly set Kato's story apart from other manga of the era, but it also led to many legal headaches later down the road. Kato and Futabasha never asked for permission to use the Lupin name, and while the estate of Maurice Leblanc wasn't thrilled, they couldn't really do anything about it, as Arsène Lupin had fallen into the public domain in Japan by that time, letting the manga continue as planned. This would later become a problem when Lupin III began to make its debut overseas, but we'll talk about that later. This issue over copyright is in some ways ironic, as Maurice Leblanc once did the exact same thing, inserting the famous detective Sherlock Holmes into an Arsène Lupin story. When Holmes' author, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, requested he change the name, Leblanc complied, changing the character's name to the incredibly clever Herlock Sholmes. Yes, I'm not kidding, and if you're wondering, that is indeed the reason why the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles changed Holmes' name as well. And since Lupin Part 6 features Sherlock Holmes as a main character, I guess you could say this whole thing has come full circle. Speaking of name changes, Kazuhiko Kato used a pen name for Lupin III, writing under the odd name of Monkey Punch. Kato was actually given this name by his editor to make his name match his more foreign-inspired art, and while he didn't like it himself, he figured that since the manga was only supposed to run for 3 months, he could ditch it then and start anew. But of course, that plan never came to be. For a long time, it was believed that Monkey Punch actually referred to both Kazuhiko Kato and his brother Teruhiko Kato, and that they both created Lupin III, but this isn't actually true. While Teruhiko did help his brother out with the manga, it was strictly as an assistant and he had no creative input on the project. Lupin III debuted on August 10th, 1967, and quickly became a surprise hit, leading to Futabasha commissioning additional chapters from Kato. Far surpassing the initial plan of 3 months, the manga was published weekly for nearly 3 years, ending its run in May of 1969. Additional chapters were published as Shin Lupin III, also known as Lupin III New Adventures, and released in English as Lupin III World's Most Wanted from 1977 through 1981. The manga delighted audiences in Japan and soon became a highly popular series, beginning the franchise we know and love today. But what was it about the manga that made it resonate with people back in the day, and what fueled its rising success? And more importantly, what exactly is Lupin III anyway? The best way to answer that is to look at the manga itself, specifically the first two series, examining the stories and characters and analyzing what holds it all together. A lot of the elements that define Lupin III begin here, and this is also the perfect spot to detail the characters and what their roles typically are. So let's start with a discussion of the 5 main characters. The titular protagonist, Arsène Lupin III, is a master thief whose life goal is to steal all the world's treasures. In addition to his namesake grandfather, Kato also took a lot of inspiration from James Bond when designing Lupin, bringing in that character's suave charms and womanizing personality. Always armed with his trusted Walther P38 pistol, Lupin is a man of many faces, figuratively as he's alternatively silly, cocky, mysterious, laid-back, and intelligent, and literally as one of his most famous tricks is being able to disguise himself as anyone. He's a cunning, sly, and daring individual who's not just in this business for the material reward and to live up to his family name, he loves the thrill that comes with stealing and does what he does to have a good time. By his side is Jigen Daisuke, sharpshooter extraordinaire and all-around cool dude inspired by tough guy actors like James Coburn. Jigen is an expert at just about anything that fires a projectile, but favors his .357 Magnum, which he handles with unparalleled speed and precision. He's usually a voice of reason compared to Lupin's more zany personality, often preferring to hang back if he believes that a plan isn't worth the risk. While his willingness to participate in Lupin's schemes fluctuates depending on the circumstance, he remains loyal to Lupin and can always be counted on in the end. Then there's Fujiko Mine, another thief willing to do whatever it takes to get her hands on a treasure no matter how many backs she needs to stab. Originally, Kato introduced a new female lead each week that was always named Fujiko Mine, but this would later be retconned to make them all the same person, a smart move in my opinion. She's often the object of Lupin's affections, but the two share a complex relationship, with Fujiko sometimes working with him and often working against him, but never doing anything unless it benefits her in some way. And yet, no matter how many times Fujiko betrays him, Lupin always seems to find room in his heart for her. Introduced later in the series is Goemon Ishikawa XIII, a samurai whose Zantetsuken blade can slice through anything. And I literally mean anything. He was introduced to bring an Eastern perspective to a manga that was very Western influenced, with Kato making him a descendant of the legendary samurai Goemon Ishikawa. This guy isn't seen as often as the others, and really only shows up when the plot needs him to cut something for whatever reason, but it makes every one of his appearances memorable. He conducts himself with the traditional samurai code of honor, and, like Jigen, is another more conscionable mind within the group, contrasting well with the others who are far greedier and more violent. Finally, there's Koichi Zenigata, a police inspector working for Interpol whose sole mission is to capture Lupin and bring him to justice. He's named after the mythical Japanese policeman Heiji Zenigata and is sometimes considered a descendant of his as well, though this doesn't come into play very often. Zenigata is essentially Lupin's polar opposite, fighting on the side of the law but being just as dedicated towards his goals. Kato envisioned Zenigata as the Tom to Lupin's Jerry, as he's absolutely relentless in his pursuit, gets closer than anybody else can to catching Lupin, and yet Lupin will always remain one step ahead of him. These first two manga series establish a lot of the details that would become staples of a Lupin adventure. There's always some sort of treasure, either in the form of actual riches or some object worth a ton of money. Lupin wants to steal it via a wacky scheme, Jigen and Goemon help him out whenever he needs it, there's a lady involved that Lupin attempts to have sex with and sometimes succeeds to, a villain who's either incredibly inept or an evil scumbag whose actions are even worse than the Lupin gangs, and Zenigata hot on Lupin's trail who gets close to capturing Lupin but never close enough to get him for good. It's a formulaic manga for sure, with no real overarching plot threads, only a few common plot strings, if you will, that can permeate multiple issues but never become a major driving force behind the manga's narrative. You can jump into most chapters without any knowledge of what came before them and get the general idea, as while there are some multi-parters here and there, the majority of chapters stand on their own. Stylistically, the manga is kinda hard to pin down as it evolves over the course of its run, and it feels like Kato was trying a lot of different things at once to see what would stick. Often the art is very comedic, with characters drawn out of proportion or with exaggerated facial expressions, but sometimes it's very serious and down to earth, with some panels featuring striking, atmospheric visuals. Same with the writing, which can occasionally get deep or emotional, but on nearly every other page is filled to the brim with immature, raunchy humor, wordplay, or fourth wall breaks, including a lot of jokes at Kato's expense. It all has a very underground feel to it, in that it never feels the need to stick to conventions and often dares to reach beyond what is expected of itself. The manga is certainly the darkest and most adult Lupin to date, both in terms of the content and the characterizations. Lupin has always had a simultaneous maturity and immaturity to it, but these first two manga series take it to the extreme on both fronts. This is by far the most twisted and evil Lupin ever depicted, laser focusing on the criminal aspects of his personality. Lupin has various degrees of depravity throughout the years, usually sticking to some form of honor despite his thievery and debauchery, but this Lupin is straight up a psychopath. This leads into the most infamous part of the Lupin manga that absolutely needs to be addressed before we move on. Throwing up a trigger warning right now as we're discussing sexual assault and rape in this next segment, so if you want to avoid that, skip to this point in the video. It is essential that we talk about this as it is an unfortunate part of this manga's legacy, and I will treat it with respect, but it is certainly a heavy and problematic subject matter. Lupin's early manga is incredibly sexually charged and, as I mentioned, very rapey, present in both the actions and personalities of its male characters, especially Lupin, and the dialogue with men often forcing themselves on women and demeaning them to the status of objects. There are a number of chapters that feature depictions of sexual assault that are downright uncomfortable to read and jarring if you're used to the anime adaptations of Lupin like myself. The second manga is way more explicit, displaying full frontal male nudity, albeit through an abstract lens, and no, I'm not showing you any of it. If you really want to see how Kato drew Lupin's penis, then do your own research. Lupin's horniness has always been an essential part of his character, but after the manga, it was heavily toned down, usually with the target of Lupin's advances striking him down and gaining the upper hand. Here, it's front and center, often being the main driving force of a storyline as either the object of a character's motivations or a cheap way to segue from one plot point to another. Even if it wasn't disgusting, which it is, it often makes Lupin's personality one note. Future installments incorporate Lupin's lust as one part of his character, balancing it alongside his cool, ruthless, and playful traits, but in the manga, it sometimes feels like his sole reason to exist, which, apart from just being not acceptable, is also unentertaining. It's obviously difficult to address this part of the manga now, and if you're not familiar with the rest of Lupin, rest assured that this is the worst of it and it will be significantly toned down later on. But even if you push past that, I still don't think the manga holds up anymore because of its weird grasp of structure and tonal issues, as well as parts that aren't really explained well. Characterizations and plots are often inconsistent, and you're not really sure what kind of story you're going to get until you start reading the chapter, and I don't mean that in a good way. There's occasional references to the Lupin Empire, loosely defined as his criminal ring beyond the main quartet, including henchmen and subordinates under his thumb. This is an early idea that slowly loses importance as the manga goes on, and by the time the first anime rolled around, it would be dropped completely in favor of focusing on the main cast. And sometimes it isn't even clear what Lupin's scheme is, occasionally depicting him doing menial tasks seemingly for the hell of it, leading to some odd payoffs when his reasons for doing so don't make any sense. A lot of later issues also feature long stretches of dialogue-less antics and violence like a classic Warner Brothers cartoon, but because the action isn't paced very well, it loses a lot of impact. Overall, the manga is sort of interesting as a time capsule for Lupin's origins, but if you're looking to get into the series, you definitely don't want to start here. Regardless of how the manga holds up today, though, it was a smash hit when it debuted in 1967. Something about the series really connected with its audience, perhaps the Western influence, the unique sense of progression and tone, or, while I hope it's not the case, the darker elements. Kato is attributed the free spirit of the manga as creating a universal appeal, as in some way we respect the Lupin crew for living by nobody's rules but their own, even if their goals and actions are diabolical. Whatever the reason, the manga's success guaranteed that an anime adaptation would soon follow afterward. A pilot film was created in 1969 that eventually led to the creation of an animated TV series in 1971. It only lasted for one season, but its popularity in reruns led to the production of even more animated series, movies, TV specials, and even a few live-action adaptations. Throughout its history, many famous directors and writers would be involved with the series, including Space Cobra director Osamu Dezaki, Studio Ghibli co-founders Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahashi, Excel Saga director Shinichi Watanabe, Branded to Kill and Tokyo Drifter director Seijin Suzuki, Yu-Gi-Oh! Character designer Shingo Araki, TMS series animator Kazuhide Tomonaga, and Yuri on Ice director Sayo Yamamoto, among many others. These anime adaptations would take the franchise in different directions over the years based on the staff involved, but they're undoubtedly responsible for continuing and preserving Lupin's legacy throughout the years. It's in these shows and movies where the series really found its voice, and it's the Lupin anime that, more than anything, defined how the series would be perceived in pop culture for years to come. Kato would generally be hands-off with these anime, merely requesting that those involved in the projects do the property justice, and letting the directors, writers, and animators breathe their own life into the series, sometimes acting as a consultant and only rarely being directly involved. While these projects led to a huge explosion in popularity for the Master Thief, the success would be mostly contained to Japan for a while. Due to copyright issues regarding Lupin's name, the number of territories Lupin could be distributed to intact was slim, limiting the ability for the series to take a foothold in other regions. For decades, English releases were sparse and would often change Lupin's name to either Rupon or Wolf, among other names, and it wasn't until Part 2's English dub where Lupin would be called by his real name. In France, Lupin was known as Edgar, Detective Cambrioleur, or Edgar, Detective Burglar, and in Germany, for some strange reason, Lupin's name was changed to Hardyman. On the other hand, the series didn't require any name changes in Italy, making it easy to bring the series into that region, and as any Italian Lupin fan knows, its success in that country is nothing short of astonishing, to the point where it influences Italian pop culture at large. Throughout the decades, Lupin III has survived through not just these anime, but through continued manga, merchandising, and special events. But what about Kazuhiko Kato? Well, he would continue to write and draw Lupin manga over the years, as well as several other manga series and occasional anime work, but Lupin III would always be his most well-known project. In his later years, he taught as a professor at various universities, instructing courses on manga production and art. Sadly though, Kato passed away on April 11, 2019 at the age of 81 from pneumonia, leaving behind an impressive resume of works and, of course, one of Japan's most well-known and beloved anti-heroes. So that's the brief history of Lupin III. I apologize for not being able to go into the manga more deeply, but I wanted to at least provide a general overview of the original Lupin series. With that said, it's time to start the retrospective proper. Next week, I'll be diving into the anime, beginning with Part 1 on October 25th, so stay tuned for that, or see it now if you're watching this later. If you're in the mood for something else, I also make video game retrospectives. Check out this one I did on Luigi's Mansion. And be sure to subscribe to see new videos when they go live. Until next time, I'm Cloud Connection, and thanks for watching.